Sure that it's being recorded. Very good. That taken care of. We do keep these on our YouTube page so that, if you've watched it or if you're doing multitasking, you can always come back to it or share it with friends. Because I think this particular episode is going to have a lot of great tips for not just this upcoming storm season, but things that you may just have at your home that you've never known, what you should do to properly curate them. So as we go through the presentation, please remain muted unless you have a question you would like to ask, or excuse me, remain muted until our question and answer session at the end, or throw it in the chat. And then we'll get to as many questions as possible. Our Lunch and Learn series is a free educational program that we share with you all. So a special thank you to our Lunch and Learn sponsor, GBX Group, for allowing that to happen. The generous support of our sponsors allows us to continue providing educational programs and further our work to support Florida's history and heritage. And now I'd like to introduce to you today's speaker, Rosa Loewinger of RLA Conservation, and I'm going to let her share with you her expertise and let you know where she's coming from. But I can tell you she's a delightful resource, so full of information. And I've been on a couple panels with her and just always enjoy hearing her insights. So I know you're going to have a good time listening to her. And again, throw your questions into the chat or wait until the end. Thank you all, and I'm going to turn it over to Rosa.
Thank you very much. Let me navigate the share screen. So I'm going to go right into my share. Let me get it to where I need it to be from the beginning. Okay. And let's see. You can see my screen now, right? Can't you? Let me just, oh wait, I'm sorry. I just have to, I'm notoriously bad at these things. I think I have to stop share and put
You're
it
doing just fine. We
on.
can talk about your cove ceilings. That looks beautiful.
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. Thank you very much. All right, let me try this again. It's not like I haven't done this a million times, but as I was mentioning, one of the reasons I couldn't do it last week is because I had a really bad cold, and that cold tends to then turn into this allergy that drives me crazy. So if I falter on a word or anything, just bear with me. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for liking my cove ceiling. Um, I'm in a house actually that is from 1936, and it's everything is just the way it was. That's why we got it. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about conservation, about preparing, recovering, and managing collections, salvage in particular. Um, I'm not going to be talking about salvaging your building. This is more going to be about contents because that's what Jenny sort of asked me to focus on today. We can do one on building as well. And I want to just start by saying that I went to an incredible event in Los Angeles on Sunday, organized by this organization called the Art Recovery of Los Angeles, that is a grassroots group that formed of conservation professionals in the aftermath of the devastating fires that happened in LA in January. And this is a group of conservators that has gathered together to figure out how to bring what is often thought of as esoteric information of the conservation profession directly to the public so people could be empowered to take care of salvaging their own things. Because one of the things that happens when you have a devastating event like a fire or a hurricane is that the most of the recovery companies and even the government agencies encourage people to get rid of as much as possible. They want you to throw things away, don't deal with mold, don't deal with salts, don't deal with soot or things that are burned. Just get rid of them and move on because this is the kind of culture we live in. But the reality of it is people's treasures are people's treasures. And if you have a photo album with the only pictures of your mother the last time they were alive, which is something that was seen on Sunday at that LA event, even if it's sticky and you can only barely see that person, you're going to want to hold on to that piece. So, a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today is in the context of that and with the idea that the future of recovery is really going to be more about conservators putting this information in your hands rather than us holding it in our hands. And it is to that end that I'm going to speak today. Let me see if I. Okay, so I'm going to just tell you a couple of things about myself really quickly. I've been in the field for a very long time. I'm a professionally trained conservator. I went to the NYU Conservation Program at the Institute of Fine Arts. Professional conservation training is something that doesn't happen at many places in the United States. I would say that there are really six programs, maybe eight programs, including ones in conservation of material heritage and architecture. You can get a degree in historic preservation that does not make you an architectural conservator. And you'll see why as I talk about this stuff. And that's why it's so important for those of us who have this training to be able to bring the training at its best to general audiences like yourselves. Um, Sidebar, I'm a writer also. I've been writing about the work I do, and I've been writing also about preservation efforts in places like Miami, Los Angeles, and Havana, Cuba, where I'm from, because we get over time we learn a lot about preserving this material heritage. And as I say everywhere that I have a chance to speak these days, is that one of the things that is so vitally important these days about historic preservation and material culture preservation is that we live in a world that is digital and where all information has the potential to be manipulated, whereas we have seen all over, truths become lies, lies become truths, and we have no way of judging except by the loudest voice that is yelling the information. But something that is material and something that has a physical history retains a truth that is kind of immutable. And to just give you one quick example, the city that I come from, Havana, Cuba, the country that I come from, Cuba, the current Cuban government that has been, the Cuban dictatorship that has been in place since the early 1960s, likes to contend that there was no middle class in Cuba before 1959. But thousands of apartment buildings in the cities belie that information. And that's why this kind of thing matters, in my opinion. For many years, I've worked in private practice. All of my work has always been in private practice. And my firm since 2008 has been called RLA Conservation. Our offices are in Miami and Los Angeles, which means that we've dealt with many, many different kinds of disasters. I've been responding to earthquakes, fires, floods, hurricanes since very early in my career, since the mid 1980s when I lived in Charleston, South Carolina, and had to respond to stuff from Hurricane Hugo. And as a child, of course, I grew up in Miami, so I have that experience. And some of what we know about response has evolved over time. And what I felt the other day when I attended that event in Southern California is how much intersection there is about what you need to do when you respond to fires, floods, or earthquakes. But today, I'm going to focus primarily on water events because that's what we deal with in Florida for the most part. And I want to start off by talking about the two basic kinds of conservation treatments that are important to think about. One is um, I have some captions here that I don't think you all can see, or I can't see them because that little line with all of us are down there. But there's basically preventative work and there's remedial work. And we try wherever possible, just like in medicine, you try to do as much preventative work so that you don't have to do the remedial work. The remedial work usually involves a lot of destruction. It's almost always more expensive, and it almost always involves processes that are difficult to have someone that isn't specifically trained do. So on the left hand of the screen, you see a technician in our firm cleaning a sculpture that is in a storage facility. And the cleaning is important not only to remove dirt from the surface, but it removes dirt that attracts pests from the surface, and it allows eyes on the piece at a time when there isn't a crisis so that people can become used to seeing what is on the surface. And this is a conservation technician working on this. You know, you can clean an entire room full of sculpture in a day, but if that actually got damaged, if you saw water on the floor, if you saw the pieces on the floor, and you would have an opportunity to say, get them off the floor, that type of thing, to prevent a damage. On the right-hand side is a conservator from our firm working at Vizcaya on a flooded sub-basement. Again, there was nothing preventative that could have been done to stem the flow of water into that basement, except reinforcing the doors, putting in hurricane doors, which was done subsequently. So let's talk about preventive conservation. Of course, the first thing you need to know is to plan for what's expected in your region. Is it a hurricane? Is it an earthquake? Is it fire? Obviously, we know what we deal with in Florida, but we always have to be ready to deal with a fire because a fire is possible everywhere. And as we've seen now, there are wildfires in New Jersey. You could have wildfires anywhere, and of course, you can have an institutional or a home fire anywhere. But I'm not going to deal with that today. I'm going to deal with a water event, even though a fire event is also a water event because typically they're put out by water. But the first thing you do is you prepare by maintaining the property, making sure that your maintenance is up to par. You want to understand your home's materials, its needs, devising a structure for being ready that is going to allow you to do what you need to do. Then the other thing is you want to make an emergency plan for your contents, especially if you have heirloom artifacts or works of art. But honestly, what I've been seeing lately is it doesn't matter. What's treasured to you, your child's teddy bear from when they were 2 years old, is just as important to a homeowner as a valuable work of art is to somebody else. So the maintenance of property is understanding a home's materials and its need. Of course, things like cleaning the gutters, managing corrosion, cutting back tree limbs, removing projectiles, dealing with rising damp like you see on the right here. Corrosion is a really good thing to be on top of because when you see corrosion like you see on the left here, that's just a tip of the iceberg of what's going on underneath. And if that corrosion is bad enough under the ground, you could already have a weakening that could lead to a collapse where you wouldn't need to have something like that happen. I show this piece here because it's an example of preparing property in a way that you wouldn't necessarily think needs to be prepared. This is a sculpture that we repainted, that my firm repainted in Coconut Grove a few weeks literally before Hurricane Irma. So the sculpture's paint system was fresh on the surface right before the hurricane. It hadn't fully cured. It's too big to really remove for a hurricane or to box or tarp. But if you notice what's gone on the right-hand side of the screen, during the hurricane, two things happen. Plant debris, I don't know if you can see my cursor on the surface. Can you? Anyway, on the top image, you can see grass that has been sort of stuck into the surface. But on the bottom, this is gravel damage. There was a gravel bed about 100 feet away where the gravel was lifted by the hurricane winds and driven at full force into the paint system, and it actually punctured the paint system and caused corrosion. So whereas with grass and leaves that get into the paint system, we have a chance of getting them off because if the paint system's well done enough, you can clean it off. Those puncture marks are not so easy to remove. The first thing I want to talk about is preparatory documentation. You are probably good at documentation even without knowing it. You spend a few hours walking around your house. You can do that as a fun thing with your family. You could literally take pictures of what you own, keep a list of what you own, keep the list by room, keep it by material, keep it in whatever way makes the most sense to you. It's always best done on a computer where you can cross-reference, but if you want to do it in a notebook, the notebook is fine too, as long as you have the notebook in the group of items that you're going to take if you're going to leave. There is a very good resource here that is from the insurance industry that gives you information on how you do a home inventory of contents. I also like to make these individual rooms with a voiceover because it sometimes when you're writing on a list, you aren't putting in all the information. And I'm going to show you a video that I did of one of the rooms at my house in 1 second if I can get it to load. The photographic record could be done on an iPhone or, on any kind of phone. If there's something that is scheduled or of real value, a painting, a work of art, something of collectible importance, make sure that your insurance is up to date and that you have the information of where you're going to need that insurance information to find later. And later, as we get to the salvage component, the salvage itself happens based on the vulnerability of materials themselves. So you're going to want to have not just information like lamp, right? But you're going to say lamp with a felt shade and a metal um, uh, base. You don't have or you can say a glass base. You may know enough to say it's a bronze base, but if you don't know that kind of thing, it doesn't matter. The important thing is to have some sense of it. So later, when you're doing your recovery, you know which way to go. There are so many free and very, very reasonably priced home inventory lists online. I just did a quick search and found so many so cheaply that it was kind of mind-boggling how many you could have. I recommend just perusing and seeing which ones you like best. You could even copy them, but just make sure you keep it. And if you and if you're going to do it on by hand and not online, just make a copy and keep it somewhere. I hope I can show you this. This is a little video that I did of just the room that I'm sitting in. This is a documentary film for the purpose of recording collections that are in Rosa's study in the Packard Street house. I will also key this to images that I take and a list of objects. So for example, this wall, which is the west wall, I have two small paintings by Ruth Askren, one small work on paper by Servando Cabrera Moreno, a photograph of my dad and my son, some works on paper and a painting by me, another photo of my son, a copper bowl, Tibetan bowl. Now, I have various books and papers here, which I am going to investigate later and go into further detail to make sure. See, oh, wait, and I wanted to stop. Oh, sorry, hold on, let me go back. I wanted to stop this because as I was doing the video, I forgot there's something really important on this shelf down there, right? Which is a box of letters that were salvaged. This is a box of letters that my family got when we first came from Cuba and that my mother sent to me. These are letters from the 1960s. They're irreplaceable, but you saw in my video, I forgot about them. But when I'd be doing my inventory, I'd get them. And that just gives you a chance to really get everything down. Because once I saw those letters, then I thought, oh, that's going in my box of the things that come with me if I have to evacuate. All right, so that's pretty much all that I have to tell you about the preparation, except for one thing. You want to really make sure that you just look around. If you're, and it's not just so much about having things off the floor. The house that I'm in right now is, first of all, it's in Los Angeles, so it's unlikely to be in a flood, but that's another story. But for example, if was my place in Miami, I note that it's 5 feet off ground level anyway, but I just want to make sure that I have anything really valuable off of ground level and covered in case my roof can leak or blow off or something like that. Okay, so the event happens, and now what? What do you do? If you don't recognize this photo, this is of the devastating 1966 Florence flood that actually was a game changer in how we deal with collections and saving treasures, because here you had things that were really not just of national value, but of world value to people. The first thing, and this I got from the LA County Department of Mental Health this past weekend at that event for fires, is when you deal with an event like this, the more you're prepared, the more your emotional well-being will be intact when you come out on the other end of it. Because just having these inventory lists in case your house is really flooded, just knowing that your first step is done, that you're not dealing with nothing, is really valuable. But by the way, the stress level of it is immeasurable, and you want to start first and foremost with connecting with other individuals. Don't be isolated, reach out for help, and find other people who have, neighbors, friends, your community that can help you. I'm sure there's loads of Florida resources for things like that. So once you've had an event, okay, you've had water, things are not good. Your house has fallen, your house is flooded. Fortunately, with water events as opposed to fire events, there's not really a chance that your house is going to be completely gone and you won't be able to recover anything. But you will also probably, if your house has collapsed or the roof has blown off and it's totally flooded, a lot of people are going to be telling you to get rid of everything because of mold, because of salts, because of other toxins. I'll get to that in a second. But it is your decision what you want to salvage. It is not an agency's decision. Because even if the picture on the upper right is the murals from the Haiti earthquake in 2010 that my firm was invited to come and work on in Haiti to help remove and salvage. That seems like a completely unsalvageable or untenable thing to do. But even if you could only get one fragment of something off of your wall, that would give you a family memory that was really immeasurable. And that's only for you to decide. Because really all of these remediation agencies, they're not trained to do the detailed work. They're trained to come in, to put in big fans, to put in big blowers, to tell you what to get rid of. But as you see here, this is Venice after an alta aqua, a high water event, which is something that happens there all the time. They're not going to get rid of everything, and there's nothing to say that you should do the same. Here's another image of Vizcaya. Similarly, Vizcaya, after one of the major hurricanes of the last few years, its grounds are flooded, all its sculpture is inundated. Recovery is going to happen at places. So now to the basic concepts of mitigating material damage. And Jenny, how am I doing for time? How much time do I have?
We have at least 20 more minutes, 25 more minutes.
Excellent. Excellent. But if there's a lot of questions, I'm happy to, to go quick too.
Yeah, thank you. And just reminder to everyone, feel free to go ahead and start putting your questions in the chat as you think of them so that we don't forget about it. Thanks.
Again, so the basic concepts of mitigating material damage are right here. There's a lot of, and I've already gone through a lot of that. There's a lot of truths and falsehoods about mold and coatings and sealants and salts. One thing I tell people to stay away from YouTube and TikTok videos that tell you how to do things, because unless those YouTube and TikTok videos are put up there by trained professional conservators, they are not to be relied upon. Home remedies of various sorts are not necessarily going to be good for you. And the fact is, there is much more of an effort these days to get that correct information out to general audiences, which is a terrific thing for the public. So this again is a post-fire recovery checklist, but it works also for main things after water event. There are the 5 important steps. First, don't throw it out. Don't throw it out. Try to get it out. Do not try to dry them quickly. Don't use a hair dryer. Use a fan indoors for indirect airflow. That is to say, don't blow the fan directly onto the thing. Just have the air circulating in the room. Once you've got them dry, place them in a plastic or cardboard box, and you can line it with soft things like paper cloths or tissue, but don't cover them or wrap them in plastic. Keep the box in a cool, dry, preferably dark place to prevent further damage, and then seek professional help or seek professional help, not necessarily to hire a conservator to do the work for you, but seek professional help to find out what you can do yourself for the things that you have. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how salt damages, so you understand a little bit about salts and how it is a very devastating thing. But for starters, most of us who live around along the coast already have a lot of salts in the things that we own, because salt air, if you're living, if your things are outside and they're in rooms with open windows, already have salts on them. But the fact about salts is this: salts damage things physically because porous materials absorb them, and when they're in liquid form, and when they dry, they crystallize differently each time, which physically crumbles or corrodes things. And it also works chemically because the salt that's found in salt air and in oceans becomes acidic through a chemical reaction called hydrolysis. Um, but here's the good news about salts: they're pretty easy to remove. Um, you want to get some advice on how to do it, but if you're finding that things are efflorescing with salts, if you have that white crust on them, you can brush them off. Don't try to scrub them off. The good news is that really you can almost always just either soak them in changed baths of distilled water, or you can use poultices. But it all depends on what kind of material you have, because you want to be very careful with materials that are organic, which I'll talk about in a minute. So, general, before the site access, you're going to, this is actually written in part for institutions that you're going to contact your professional conservator. Chances are that most of you in your homes aren't going to do that first. You're going to review your emergency response plan. You're going to gather the materials that you need. You're going to have a generator ready if you need it. And you're going to gather some salvage protocols by material type. What types of materials are you going to need to do salvage of your personal collections? Most of what you are going to need is going to be available at your local hardware store, at your local, I don't want to promote any particular mega conglomerate brands, but you know the places we're talking about. You want some clean towels. You can use your old towels if you want, the ones that you know you're going to throw out anyway. I like white towels, but you know, sometimes those towels you're going to throw away aren't white, and so be it. You want support to carry wet items. So, for example, if you have like a wooden uh, jewelry box, for saying something. So you have a wooden jewelry box that is flooded, it's in the water, the velvet's all messed up, it was given to you by your great grandmother, you don't want to lose it. You don't want to pick it up by its own weight. You want to put something underneath it, a piece of heavy duty cardboard, a piece of plywood, because you want the weight distributed on it. The fans that you're going to use to circulate air, you want wet objects around them. You don't want the air pushing at them. Blotter paper is excellent for removing really heavy duty moisture from things. But if that's not available to you, you could also use paper towels, white paper towels, to do that. You want to be careful of the shop towels that are blue. Even though I've never had an experience with the dye coming out of those, still you want to make sure when you're blotting anything that you're not taking pigment out of it, and you're better seeing that in white paper. If you have access to distilled water, you want to have distilled water on hand for that kind of thing. And here's the thing: do not use bleach on objects. No matter what, do not use bleach on objects. Put them aside if they have mold on them. Put them in an air place where they are well aired. Most mold is not toxic. A lot of people think that if there's any mold, it's toxic, but that is not true. For taking care of your home, if you have wide scale mold on your home, there are different protocols than for objects. All right. You want to have plastic sheets and blue tape around to take care of certain things, but you don't want to take your wet items and seal them in that kind of thing, or you're going to definitely grow mold. You want gloves. You want to you want gloves to protect um, well, in general, when you're moving things, you want to be protecting the objects, but in this case, you want to be protecting yourself. If you don't really want to be using cotton gloves on this occasion, you want to be using work gloves, or you want to be using nitrile gloves or plastic gloves of some sort. But if you're going to have a lot of things that you're moving around, you want to be sure you can wash these gloves in between. I'm not one that throws out the gloves every time I use them. I try to reuse and rewash as much as possible. So the first thing is when you're entering a wet building, the first thing you want to understand is this. Things that are water soaked are not just water soaked. There's mud, there's bugs, there's building materials, depending on the age of the building. There could be lead, there could be asbestos, there's might be broken glass. If there's been a fire, and one of the things we've seen lately, here's another, is that electric cars catch on fire when they are flooded. And we've seen situations in water events where there's been hurricane damage or a pipe burst that the car catches on fire, so you have a soot and a water event at the same time. So you want to be wearing gloves to protect yourself from anything you um, touch. And you want to either be wearing heavy duty work boots, or if you don't have them and you only have shoes, just put some plastic around your shoes to walk around. Your documentation after the event is going to be similar to during the event, but kind of the flip side. It's not going to line up end to end in some cases because you're not going to have the things located in the same location. You want to describe in writing a summary room by room and by type of material. If you're going to bring these things to a professional that's going to help you with it, you want to be able to just speak about what you know. Don't try to be technical. Don't try to diagnose the materials, because for us, it's better to have the raw data. That is to say, my object is wet and there's brown stains on it. You don't want to start speculating they're mold stains or they're whatever stains, because you may not know all the possibilities of what's possible. Sometimes soot and mold can look the same when you're seeing them on an object, especially one that's been wet. So you could say there's something on this that looks like soot or mold. Mold tends to have more of a bloom on the surface, right? Which you could see with magnification. And of course, you're going to have a greater tendency of seeing mold if the temperature is high and the relative humidity remains consistently high as well. If you have any possibility of stabilizing your environment, you should try to do that. You can do that with dehumidifiers, with different kinds of air scrubbers. Again, for a home, that's not always as possible. Usually what you want to be doing is moving the air around. So the first thing you want to do, let's say you walk into your house and it looks like that image on the left of my screen. What's the first thing you're going to want to do? You want to get rid of the excess water. You want to try to do whatever you can to get rid of that excess water. You want to do it safely. You see the individuals wearing boots who's standing in there. You want to do that either by using a pump to get the water out, but monitoring what's coming through that pump so you're not sucking in objects or materials that can be pulled along with it. You definitely want as much excess water off as possible before you try to do anything else. That's, job number one. And then if you're dealing with a room that looks like the one on the right, if you're seeing mold at that level, you definitely want to be protecting yourself. And in a room like that, yes, you want to take those blinds down. You want to take them outside and give them a good scrubbing and washing with soap and water and possibly using a fungicide. And then the walls themselves, you're going to definitely want those cleaned. And there in those situations, I would use bleach. I would use, bleach to kill the mold. There are two things that kill mold really well, but neither of them are good for collections. One is bleach, and the other is sunlight. If you could cut that house open and unfold it and put it in the sun, the mold dies. Mold does not like sun. So those are the things that you need to know. So getting the windows open, getting light into the room is important. Of course, bringing the relative humidity under 60% is great for getting rid of mold. In Florida, we are not always that fortunate to be able to do that. And if you're going to do this yourself and get mold or dust or dirt off of an object yourself, you definitely don't want to use your average vacuum cleaner. You need to use a vacuum fitted with a HEPA filter or a HEPA vacuum cleaner, because you don't want to be pushing out into the air what you're pulling into the vacuum cleaner. And HEPA vacs are pretty popular now. They're a little pricier than a regular vacuum cleaner, but not by much. And they're an important tool in any kind of work like this. And you can see here at the bottom of the screen that the specialist does not have that suction right up to the surface of what she's working on. She's actually hovering the vacuum cleaner, excuse me, over the surface, using a brush to push the dirt and mold towards it. If you have things that are packaged, framed, you want to get them you want to get them out of those microclimates. You want to unframe things. But if things are stuck together, don't try to take them apart yourself. Just that you really want to consult with a professional right away. But all of those things you see here on this screen, you want to get those records out of those plastic sleeves, and you want to open those frames and separate the elements, because you might discard all the we are likely to discard all of the framing material around it, though not necessarily the frame itself, and certainly not the artworks. Now, in order of priority for things that are wet, you want to be thinking about the most vulnerable things first in terms of your priority. If you have baskets, if you have leather handbags, if you have clothing, those are the things that need to come first. If you have anything made of any kind of animal bones or antlers or horn, you shouldn't have ivory, but you may have a historic ivory that your great grandfather brought from who knows where. You want to be careful about those. And photographs and works on paper. This is the first line of the defense. This is where you put your efforts first if all else is equal. The next thing is anything that is unstable and metal, anything that's archaeological, any kind of ceramic that don't have a glaze on it, untreated stone. If you have things that break because I had a situation once where I worked for a historic museum that was in the path of a coming storm. This is years ago. And it was in Havana. I'm just going to say it outright. This is the Casa de las Americas indigenous collection, and there was a big nor'easter coming that did one of those things like Hurricane Sandy, where two fronts collided to create this massive event, and they knew they were going to get a storm surge. And what they did is they took all the works of art and put them onto tables to get them off the floor. But what they didn't realize is that the storm surge was going to go so high within the room that the tables would float in the water, even with all these objects on them, and they flipped and lots of things broke. When you have breakage, the first thing you want to do is collect as many pieces as possible and keep them together in a box or whatever. So whenever you have a wet textile, and this is a lot of what people have in their houses, carpets, clothing, rugs, blankets. You want to unroll things as much as possible and lay them out flat, which can be the challenge, since it's hard to do that. And then you want to try to blot to the extent possible so that you don't have water sitting on the surface, but you have to be careful of running colors because as you can see in some of these images, the water that ran actually moved the color across the surfaces, right? So you want to be able to blot some of that running dye off. And when you blot the water that is on the surface, you might get some dye running onto your thing at first. So if you can lay it flat so that the color doesn't run, these are textiles that were hung on the wall. That's what caused the running. If the colors run, you want to blot gently with absorbent materials. You see the image on the upper right. Well, both of those images are at our studio in Miami following probably Hurricane Irma, where we got these collection objects that got wet from a leak in a roof. And we just blotted carefully to see what we could get. But you see that the color is running, the dye is running. And you want to uh, place blotters below and above them. And you can reuse those blotters once you dry them, as long as it's salt water wasn't what got on them. And again, using a hair dryer on a cool or a low setting, you don't want to push right into the surface, but you want to do the direction of the hair dryer perpendicular to the surface. Slow drying is counterintuitive, but it's what you want. You don't want things to dry fast. You want to raise them onto a pallet if you can, if you have planks like this. You want to wrap them in something so they're not directly onto the wood. And you want to wrap in polyethylene sheeting, not the object itself, but the planks or anything that's on them so you don't transfer toxins from one thing, contaminants, not toxins, from the pallet into the object. One option for wet organic materials that cannot be dealt with within 48 hours is freezing. If you have a chest freezer, which so many homes do, you could put it in a chest freezer. That doesn't mean you need to empty your freezer. You just want to clean an area out of the freezer so that your object isn't touching, frozen orange juice or meat or anything like that. You want to make sure that the freezer is at its coldest setting before you put the piece in, because if there is any, you want the object to go from wet to frozen as quickly as possible. This will buy you time until the objects can be addressed. It will arrest mold formation. It'll keep the inks and dyes from moving, and it also will avoid deformation from the drying. Here you do want to wrap the object in polyethylene plastic and tape because you don't have any danger of growing mold, and you want to try to get as close to 32 Fahrenheit if you can. If you have a lot of things to freeze, or if you have a lot of neighbors with things to freeze, sometimes you can gather together and get a freezing truck or talk to your local store that has a big freezer and see if things can be put in there. A lot of things in our homes are plastic. A lot of works of art are plastic, and plastics have their own issues. When they're wet, they can become tacky. You don't want to touch those surfaces because you will imprint something into it. You want to rinse any mud or dirt lightly, but don't blot those surfaces at all. I've already shown this image. Another thing, wet textiles are going to be heavier and more fragile than when they're dry. So you want to move them very carefully. You want to use like a tray. You want to use a secondary support. You can even use a dry sheet that you have to move a wet thing. What you don't want to do is try to like lift a carpet that is soaking wet by itself. Like let's say you have a carpet that's wet on the floor. You might want to roll it, or you might want to slip a sheet underneath it and move it that way and get help to do it. Again, for textiles, quick drying is better than very slow drying. That is to say, You don't want to try to dry it out by putting heat across it, but you don't want it to be days and days of wet drying. Now, when you have wood pieces, the joints may separate. You might have lifting veneer and old repairs that come apart. Water can soften or lift most of the finishes. You can get cracking or splitting or warping. Sometimes the drawers and compartments on furniture will stick, so what you have inside of that won't be easy to take out. The same thing with fragile surfaces. These are the kinds of things that I'm giving you advice about because you shouldn't try to force it. Don't try to force those drawers open when they're swollen. Wait until they dry out a little bit because they will shrink back to size. And what's inside of them, even though they're stuck in there and you will have some trouble getting them out, later you might add, here, what I'm trying to say is this. Let's say you have a cabinet with wooden drawers that swells and sticks shut. If the cabinet is the most important thing, you want to just wait until the sticking isn't happening anymore as the wood shrinks a little bit and then try to open it. But let's say the cabinet is only mildly important, but what's inside of those drawers is the issue. Then you may need to actually get through the drawer. You might want to cut the panels out and get the stuff out because the stuff that's inside is in a microclimate that as it dries and sticks together is going to be harder to later take apart. So it's only you that can draw the value judgment on what is most important to you in a situation like that. Of course, anything that's painted, whether that's a canvas painting or an object that's painted, is going to be among the most vulnerable things. And if you don't know whether your paint is water soluble or not, you surely don't want to touch it. But even paint that's not water soluble is subject to a lot of damage from getting wet. So you definitely want to let that dry carefully before trying to get mold or dirt or anything off the surface. I know I'm coming to the end of my time, so I'm just going to say a couple more things since I know this is going to be online. Gently wash mud and dirt from stable metals, high fire ceramics. You want to not use anything that scrubs because your surfaces are going to be more vulnerable. Don't hose things down. You don't want to wash anything like a plaster or a low-fired ceramic, any medium with a surface paint. Let that be the object you take to your clinic later and have someone help guide you on what to do. See, a few years ago, I would have said, take that to the conservator and let them deal with it. But now that I can see that we have the opportunity to convey some of that information, take that to your clinic, let the conservator guide you. Sometimes you'll have to have a conservator work on it, but very often, if you're someone that's handy or an artist yourself or a contractor, you can be guided into the right way of taking care of things. Metals will corrode. Sometimes metals will have finishes that are hard to determine before they start corroding, so you want to be careful not to try to remove things until you know what you have. Let me see. Again, I've already mentioned this. The air drying procedures, efflorescence, where you have salts coming onto the surface. You want to check for them. You want to look for it, but notify a professional about that. And here are a few final points. You always want to wear PPE and replace it as needed. Since you don't know what is actually on a surface, you don't know, for example, if your wall collapses into your water and has lead paint on it, whether the pieces you're taking have lead paint on it. And you want to wear gloves all the time, replace it. And if you're working with your stuff, let's say your house is flooded out, you're staying somewhere else, and you're just coming to try to salvage and recover what you can, whenever you go home, take those clothes off in a clean room or in a bathroom. Don't walk through your house with them, and wash them immediately and shower yourself right at that. Um, I've created this water damage recovery checklist. I used AI to help me put my own thoughts into an organized format, and this is what they came up with. It's not the be all and end all, but it's something you can use. And then there's so many different types of resources available to you as homeowners for this, and do not ever be afraid to reach out to the American Institute for Conservation for assistance. Thank you. And here are the resources of some of our Florida-based conservators who work diligently and tirelessly on some of these materials. And I'm going to stop share right now so you guys can ask me a couple of things.
Wow. Thank you so much, Rosa.
That
I'm
was
always
useful.
enlightened.
I hope that was helpful.
Very much so. You covered so many things, and I know that we have several questions ourselves,
Sure.
but I'd like to make sure that we do get to some of our attendees' questions. Before I forget, though, I do want to again thank you. You have been a resource for us at the Florida Trust when we've done our hurricane assessments. We're just for the benefit of everyone else, in particular working with War Mineral Springs and down in Southwest Florida after Hurricane Ian, did a number on some of the murals that were in there in
Right.
the one of their complexes. And from what we understand, the city is working to preserve those structures still. So I can't, thank you enough for your resources. And I do hope that we can get a copy of those so we can share that with
Sure.
our listeners.
I see a couple questions here that I
Yeah.
could answer quickly. Somebody asked about maintaining, preserving exterior brick buildings made with sandstone brick. It's a big topic. Happy to do a webinar for you on it. Because you're right, they're complicated and but they can be taken care of. There's ways to take care of it. And what I will tell you what not to do first. Don't just put some kind of sealant on them. There's a lot of steps you can do first. So maybe we can consider, and by the way, there's resources online. This is Emily who asked that. One of the things I would recommend is go on to the National Parks website. I believe that there is a conservogram about maintaining exterior buildings with sandstone brick. I think there should be something available. It might be a little bit old, but we could also talk about doing something. And then the question somebody asked me about how I got into my career and advice for others, especially women who would like to work in conservation. Look, there's two kinds of ways to become a conservator. Um, well, there's two kinds of conservation in general terms. There's architecture and there's materials. And materials, and they each divide into their multiple subcategories. So the best way I think these days to become a conservator is to go to school, to go to one of the conservation training programs. They have a lot of requirements. There's a lot of information that you need to get in. And it's not just to be gatekeepers, it's for a good reason because you really need to have a lot of hand skills and science to go. So look into the various conservation programs and look into what you might be interested in. Are you interested in architecture? Because that's a little bit more accessible because you don't need quite the level of science to get into the architecture programs because the science of building conservation is filtered through engineering and also through some of the requirements of what is needed to work on a building that limits some of what our choices can be. Um, so that's the best way to do it. The other thing too is all the programs are going to require some kind of pre-program exposure to the field, either as as a technician or a pre-program intern. Um, Most private conservation facilities have access to that. I know a lot of museums have access to that, and historic societies where if you work as, say, the assistant to the collections manager at a historical society, but doing some of the hands-on work that would be conservation related, that would serve as experience. It's a tough moment right now, mainly because, as we know, uh, some of the federal jobs are being um, closed down. So it's a rough moment for the field of conservation because a lot of conservators are losing their jobs due to these I'm going to just say draconian cuts to the budget that allows them to be employed. So whereas normally speaking, a firm like ours in Florida has lots of openings for pre-programmed, not lots, but usually a couple, and usually we have big projects, but we're seeing that the field is now needing to train conservators to have to offer employment to people who are further along in their careers. That said, nothing lasts forever. And it's always a shift. In 2008, we all remember how it was devastating. There was no work. People didn't have ways of getting trained, and people got trained anyway. So just hang in there. Shoot us an email. Shoot me an email if you want. Depending on where you live in Florida, there may be opportunities I can point you to. One thing I can tell you is there's nowhere in Florida to train in conservation. You can train in historic preservation at a few different institutions, but that does not train you in conservation. That's a different story.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions out there? Anyone want to come off mute? We only have a couple minutes left, but if there's something you're dying to ask, we'd love to hear from you. I'm just looking forward to putting some of this information together, and we might want to do a follow-up article, not only a newsletter that we'll send out to our group that attended today with some resources, but I think that you gave us some really good insights on some things, some of the work that we can continue to help educate folks on, maybe in our next magazine issue.
I just hope that the main takeaway that you get from this is don't believe the recovery companies that say things can't be salvaged. If it is important to you as a community, as a homeowner, save it first and then learn that you can't save it later. The decision's in your hands.
That's very empowering. And that's the truth. And I appreciate also your insights about essentially our field in preservation is first do no harm. And so that's something we all agree on.
Exactly. And I really I feel this is a moment for us in preservation because the value of what we do has now come to the fore as meaningful. I'm
Mhm.
sure because it what exists and it matters.
All right, everyone. Well, I'm going to close it up with just a couple comments. I want to just thank you all for attending. We very much appreciate it. We very much appreciate the support of GBX, our sponsor. And again, this is being recorded, so you can go back on YouTube or share it with others as you may find it something more to learn from. And if you or your company is interested in sponsoring one of our Lunch and Learns, we do have upcoming sessions. The next one is actually May 22nd on the 11 to Save program, but we are offering these throughout the end of the year. So stay tuned, sign up and register for those next workshops, and let us know if you want to help us by sponsoring. So we hope that you also join us in signing up for our Relaunch Preservation Passport program. Information can be found on our website about that as well. We're very excited about that. And we also will probably see some of you in person at our Preservation on Main Street conference happening in July. But if you can't wait until then, there's also an educational opportunity in Brevard County, May 17th. And you can find information on that on our website. But essentially, we're going to be taking our preservation toolkit on the road. So thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Rosa, so much for sharing your expertise and your encouragement.
Thank you so much.
All right, everybody, take care.
See you all soon.